the Sustainability Management Master's Program, you're answering one simple question. Do you care about your future generation? If you care about your kids, their grandkids, then you care about sustainability. And a sustainability manager is someone who has the tools to make people understand how they can contribute towards developing a sustainable world. We have both part-time and full-time students. Our curriculum is 30 hours. Instead of thesis, we have a research project course and a seminar course which provides them with the kind of research background they will need to be successful in their job. But at the same time, sustainability is not always everything about environment. It also relates to the business. They will take a sustainable business strategies course. They will take a project management course. Most of these courses are going to be taught by industry people, the people who are doing sustainability on a daily basis as a part of their job. Any organization that has a large number of employees and has a physical infrastructure, they will have to have a sustainability office. If you have the passion to develop and maintain a sustainable world, come to us and we will help you shape your passion into a career which will create an impact.
The Stevens Institute of Technology is proud to present the Hugo New and Geocentric Consultants Hugo New Corporation Sustainability Seminar Series. Co-sponsored by Brown and Caldwell, H2M Architect and Engineers, BEM Systems, Catalyst Group, and WSP.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate it. So I'll get started. I appreciate those kind words. And as Dib said, my dissertation is the comparing lead and non-lead schools in New Jersey and reflected on the impact lighting has on learning. So my background is very unique. I went to architecture school, graduated, was in the architecture world, left the architecture world, went into the education world, spent 27, 28 years in public education, and found my way, circled back into the architecture world. Joined H2M for a very specific reason, because their culture speaks volumes of what I believe as a person and their process and the direction that they go in terms of how they are interacting with the community. So H2M's been around for almost 90 years, and they're a multidisciplinary firm. And one of the things that is unique is H2M works across all disciplines. And as we journey through this presentation, looking at my dissertation, but I would like to tie some other things in as well that H2M is involved with, and that is really understanding the community and the community we live in. So today, what we're going to look at is really an understanding of LEAD, which is the Leadership in Energy and Environmental Design. Understanding how sustainability and green buildings affect learning and affect the occupants within that space. The classroom, how it's changed, or I should say, how we should be changing it. It has not changed significantly over 100 years. What, from my perspective, the 9 foundations of a healthy building and what that looks like as we move into our design world or our sustainable world, and what that means for us as stewards of our community. The basis for my research, the sustainability for the future, and then what our purpose is as we move forward, and the direction we need to take as we move forward. So just really a quick overview. I'm sure many of you know this, but the U.S. Green Buildings Council created benchmarks in design, construction, maintenance, how a building is put together, and established a point system for moving towards more green or sustainable type buildings. That certification is used widely uh, through globally. And if you were to go overseas in the United Kingdom, there are other similar type of organizations that uh, reflect on that sustainable or lead design. Green construction all ties back in and understanding that you're preserving that the natural resources and improving quality of life. What we do as designers and as those that are interested in a sustainable world is really understanding that LEED is a framework for an efficient and effective carbon and cost saving green buildings that really have life expectancy way beyond. And we'll talk about what that means in terms of the life cycles and how that is associated with design. I share this slide with you. I have a colleague that she and I were in graduate school together, and she worked on how the classroom hasn't changed in 100 years, and that we need to shift learning as we begin to have sustainable environments. We need to shift into a more student-centered environment where the students are driving the learning and not necessarily the lecturer up at the front of the front of the classroom. So what the classroom looked like 100 years ago is very similar. That's that picture up on the left. And what her dissertation was to really understand innovative spaces and then learning the truth about those classrooms. And I'll share this information with Stevens, and she actually did a TED talk on her presentation, and that was uh, in that in that slide. So the now 9 foundations of a healthy building and what that means for the sustainable world. This is policies and research that was generated from the Harvard School of Public Health, and that that document looked at what a healthy building means and
Joe, you have frozen.
Yeah, I think there is technical difficulty on his side.
building. The reason I bring this slide up is I focused on.
Joe, sorry to interrupt. You froze for a bit, so you might have to rewind last 30 seconds.
Say that again.
You froze for a bit, so can you please rewind 30 seconds?
Yep, that's fine.
Yeah.
Right here. We're going to go here.
No,
Or
you
just
can
go.
start the next slide
Okay.
again.
That's okay. So the 9 foundations of a healthy building, um, those 9 foundations were generated from research and public policies related around what those 9 foundations look like and how they affect our a building. So the Harvard School of Public Health was the generator of that document, and that document looked at research over decades and what that means as we move forward. My dissertation, my research was based on the lighting and views associated with the 9 foundations of a healthy building. So what my research was, I looked specifically at LEED and non-LEED schools in New Jersey and the perception of the occupants in those spaces and what those effects were on learning. So that was the basis for my research. Now, I'll just tie back in the beginning of the presentation when I talked about my worlds are intertwined. I spent a time in the architecture world, I spent time in the education world, and as a designer and as an educator, and looking at an environment that's conducive to learning, I wanted to look at whether or not there was a significant difference in how lighting played a role in the classroom. My research was based on quite a few published research related around the three areas I looked at was the lighting and visual comfort, the health and well-being, and the delivery of instruction. So when we look at light, not all light is created equal, and how we generate light is those systems can be manipulated. Not all artificial light, you know, has reproduces a full. The artificial light reproduces a full spectrum of sunlight, but how that artificial light enters into the space can change depending on many different variables. Um, so understanding that visual comfort plays a huge role in whether or not someone can be successful at those tasks that they are doing within the classroom. Again, I focus specifically on the classroom and learning, but in the design world, this could be across many different disciplines, whether that's the person at their desk, whether that's a person within their office, how the building is orientated. Um, the visual comfort, how the glare within those spaces and the light and the glare affects those individuals being able to work in that space. Health and well-being. We looked about. I looked at the indirect lighting system and how that indirect lighting system or artificial lighting could have. I'm sorry, indirect lighting systems have a less um, visual fatigue or fewer headaches than those that have direct lighting. So that task lighting. Um, how what other impact? What other factors play into job satisfaction? Whether that's poor working conditions or not or adequate or above average working conditions. And then what does it mean to understand and how we change our moods depending on how that light affects us within that space. Um, what I'll just touch on, but really focused on the lighting piece, what what were those educators, did the educators have the information to be able to deliver instruction as it relates to the nine foundations of a healthy building, what a LEED building is, or a sustainable or green building, and whether or not that school can be used as a learning tool as we move forward. So I drew. Are we still good, Samir? I just want to
Yes.
make sure. Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
Um, I just had a signal come up that said it was bad connections. I just wanted to make sure. So as I moved forward, what I looked at was 10 newly constructed buildings in New Jersey, LEED and non-LEED. They were designed or had LEED certifications. So not all buildings, while they are designed with the LEED components, they don't always obtain that certification. The buildings that I looked at, those individuals may or may not have known that they were in a LEED building. I focused specifically on New Jersey K-12 because that was where my experience was. I looked at I was focusing on lighting types and the visual comfort and the health and well-being that was associated with that. So in order to kind of give you a little bit of background, and Samir shared that some of you are in your statistics classes. When we're looking at data, in my particular case, I used the t-test, where it really was comparing the statistical difference or significant difference between one group and another group. In this particular case, it was those that were working and the perception of those working in a lead school and those that were not in a non-lead school. And then when we're looking at that data and starting to sort that all out and make some determinations, um, that that data has a significant impact on whether or not um, there was a significant um, statistical difference that was observed. So when you start looking at your data moving forward in the work that you do, you're going to see that some things in particularly in my research, some of those things were impactful and some of those things were not. There was a significant difference or not a significant difference. So those p-values play an important role. So really kind of to make it as simple as possible, the p-value stands for the probability value. It indicates how likely it is to that the result occurred by chance alone. So the the higher the number, the less likely that there was a significant impact on it. And then the lower that number, that there was a very strong evidence against your hypothesis. So as I moved forward, my questions were: was there a significant difference in the lighting types, the perceptions of those in those spaces? Was there a significant difference in the visual comfort in those spaces? And then was there a significant difference in the health and well-being between a lead or non-lead school? So those first three research questions, as I began to look at that research, that fourth one was really the delivery of instruction and whether or not those that were in lead design schools could understand those lead standards and be able to communicate those to those students that would subsequently be good stewards of a sustainable environment. I think what is important is to realize that those questions that are asked are going to have limitations. And in my research, there were certainly limitations that I had associated with collecting that data. So by focusing on those three design questions and then the comfort level based on the lighting types, that led to the potential for additional research moving forward. So what I found was comparing natural light to artificial light. There were some significant differences based on those occupants that were in the space. And I'm not going to get too deep into the data because towards the end I want to kind of tie all of this together on what it all meant. Um, on research question two, we found based on a p-value of whether there was visual comfort between those that worked in a lead design school and those that worked in a non-lead design school. And again, I, I, I selected schools that were designed with lead or were not designed with lead in place while they were designing. not necessarily whether they were certified or not certified. So on question two on visual comfort, there was a significantly higher visual comfort as it related to those overall with glare, darkness, brightness, adequate amount of natural artificial lighting on campus between a school that was designed with um, lead components to it or non-lead components to it. So found that similar um, data in the health and well-being of those that were in those and lead and non-lead schools. And I know I keep saying lead and non-lead school because I want to make a comparison between the two. In question number four, it took a little bit of a shift, and I was looking at whether or not whether or not staff had the tools and resources to be able to deliver instructions as it related to green or sustainable or in this case lead schools. And it was pretty interesting based on some of the um, responses, uh, those respondents to the survey had an opportunity to add narrative to it. And when I collected that data, what I found was that there, while teachers and staff members knew that they were in a lead school, they didn't really understand what that meant and how they might be able to use the building as a teaching tool for their students. So it was interesting to to see whether or not they understood lead and non-lead, whether they understood what the 9 foundations or what a healthy building looked like, while they may not have known what the 9 foundations of a health building, what those components were, they certainly could have a perception of whether or not they felt it was a healthy building or not. So when we look at those 9 foundations of a healthy building and creating an environment that is conducive to learning, it is critical that we look at all of those components. So in this particular case, I think while all of those components are valuable and necessary, there are a handful of those that are direct link to how students may or may not perform in the classroom. And so, you know, as we enter into a space, and I'm sure all of you have been in environments, classroom environments, where it may have been too cold or it may have been too hot. It may have been too noisy um, or there could have been more quiet in that environment. The lighting was poor. The glare and the shadows were there, and that building or that environment caused a discomfort for you as a student, or if you're delivering instruction as a staff member. So, what I found in my research is that we have a responsibility. In my case, it was in my research, it was the educational leaders have a responsibility to ensure that students are going to reach their highest potential and that they have to focus on a space that is conducive to learning and um, while being physically prudent to those communities. Now, the the physical environment has an impact on the end user. And while I was focused on lighting and as the focus for my research on natural or artificial, there are a lot of other factors that played into um, people's, or I should say, those end users and the occupant satisfaction within the space. So again, while my research was specific to lighting, um, when I look at future research, I'll share with you what I think needs to happen. And while we may, as individuals, realize that valued engineering, while might be less expensive, can we, there is definitely long-term effects on the life cycle of the building and what that looks like. And when you are journeying through the sustainable world, there you may get comments like, I'm not going to get my money back on the building. I'm not going to be able to pay for that up front. There's going to be too much cost up front to be able to justify going in that direction. And I would employ you to while you may need to educate those individuals, you need to help them understand that uh, when we look at sustainability, we are looking in the moment, but we are also understanding sustainability, what it means in 10, 20, 30 years from now, 2032, 2042, 2052. And what does that mean as we move forward? And one of the things that I found that those that were on the team, on the design team, didn't really have a good understanding and were not really educated as to whether what it meant to be a LEED design building or have those elements as a green building or a building that would be a perfect opportunity as a teaching tool as they move forward. So for me, looking at the future research, what I'm looking at or what I think has to happen is really understanding how the delivery of instruction is related to sustainable schools, and can we have spaces that are designed or focused on the 9 foundations of a healthy building? What does that look like moving forward? And how do we make sure that we are educating our constituents, whether that's in the municipal world, whether that's in the private sector, or whether that's in the public sector, right? So um, that is an important piece of the puzzle. One of the things I said at the beginning of my presentation was um, some of those individuals knew that they were in a LEED design school because it was promoted that way by their district. Some of those did not. Uh, how I was able to select my 10 buildings was I was reached out to the designers of those buildings and communicated with them and understood the process by which they took um, and how far they took those design components, because there are many aspects to gaining points for a more green or a higher scoring building that is related around those points that are scored. Um, some will take different routes. So while the participants didn't know whether it was a LEED or not, I think if I did the same survey identifying that they were in a LEED building, that maybe that data that I received on lighting natural lighting and artificial lighting, how that plays a role. The well-being of the occupant based on the conditions of the building. I didn't ask whether they felt that building was the conditions of that building were poor, adequate, above average, average, above average, but certainly understanding those conditions. And what I found was there was quite a few um, there was quite a bit of case study research on specific school districts throughout the country, but I have not found one in New Jersey focused on a case study specifically to artificial and natural lighting. So for future research, I'd be certainly looking at how that case study, taking a particular district and looking at how that building was designed from concept to completion and where some of those challenges were, and really understanding what the occupant's real perception or perspective of that building is. So for me, and some of and tying what sustainability means, and really, that's a broad word. That word can be perceived by others many different ways, but really understanding what sustainability means to you as a person, to you as an employee, an employer, and what that means both within uh, your place now and that place in the future. I was at a sustainability workshop this afternoon, and one of the keynote speakers spoke about whether you are in a 2 or 3 person office, or an office such as H2M where there's 475 in 10 offices. What does that mean as a firm? What does that mean as a good steward to the environment? What does that mean for you? And while while it may be different in those different places, we have a responsibility. So for me, in terms of what does it mean for sustainability with regard to my research and some of the work that I'm involved with currently, is really creating a team of those individuals that have a good understanding, administrators, board members, professional services, those governmental officials, um, the community members, and students, those that are actually using those spaces. And really developing best practice associated with sustainability, understanding those things that are a direct impact to those that are in the classroom. In my world, New Jersey School Board Association, New Jersey Department of Education, the state police, New Jersey ASBO, which are all organizations associated with with school districts and communities. Um, Two that you might want to look at, and again, you may be familiar with this. Two that you might want to look at are Sustainable New Jersey and Sustainable Jersey for Schools. So, Sustainable New Jersey has two. It's a nonprofit, and they have two. I would say divisions, if you will. There's a division that works specifically on the municipal side, and there's a division that works specifically on the school side. Their website, if you search them, their website is very interactive. It talks about those communities that are very astute to sustainable approaches, both in their master planning and how they develop and what is taking place in their community. Many of them start off with a green team and then move forward from there. So, in terms of what I would say, developing a plan for the future, and you as a young professional moving into the workplace, is that really get involved with those that are the policymakers looking to focus directly on what it means to have a sustainable approach. And I think the more we educate, the more we look at those individual, the more we look at what we can offer as part of a team, then I would say that people are more likely to jump on board when they realize the benefits. Um, our firm, and I'll discuss that in a little bit. Are There are quite a few sustainable projects that we have worked with those um, owners and those clients, and we're able to move forward with an approach to sustain a sustainable future. So these are all projects that are on our website, and Eric is a part of our firm, and he is part of the sustainable team here at H2M. If you were to look at the impact that these projects have on their community, I'm sure you would be pleasantly surprised as you move forward. So um, I'll conclude with from my aspect. Eric is on the call. He is our sustainability director. Ron Lanier is one of the discipline directors. One of the things that we do as a firm is look at what that means to design um, from concept to completion, and really understanding the environmental and social concerns that are associated with that. Here, if you look at the list, this is a list of those design services wrapped around sustainability that um, are part of our everyday effort. So, um, understanding what that return on investment looks like and analyzing that for a client, and educating that client may take an opportunity for that client to say, "Hey, I want to move in that direction." So, from my perspective, I am I think, as in having journeyed through the architecture and education world, I am very, I've spent a lot of years in those areas. So I've seen a lot, and I've seen a lot of things um, that have come full circle on many different levels. I think if there's one takeaway from this, that there we have a responsibility as an individual to be able to share and be responsible for how we may be leaving the community. I am a firm believer. This is a saying I use all the time: leave the campground better than the way you found it. And I think when we look at sustainability and what that means, whether it's in your individual community, in your house, in your work environment, in your state, in the country, what does that mean? It means that we have a responsibility to be able to leave the world a better place than the way we found it. So we need to be conscious daily, and we need to understand those effects that what we do, and those effects not only on today but in the future. So um, I thank you very much for your time. I appreciate you listening. I know that went through a lot of information. I'll certainly open it up for any questions.